This is Radio Health Journal. I'm Reed Pence. This week, the unintended consequences of direct-to-consumer genetic testing.
I discovered in very short order that my dad who raised me wasn't my biological father.
Dealing with exposed family secrets. The Radio Health Journal returns.
I'm Nancy Benson, host of Radio Health Journal. If you enjoy listening to Radio Health Journal, you'll also like our sister show, Viewpoints, which covers a wide array of topics from education to history to the environment. Here's a preview of what they're covering this week on Viewpoints.
This week on Viewpoints.
It's one of those things that I still focus on to this day, like what kind of person am I trying to be? What kind of impact am I trying to have on others? How do I want people to remember me?
The importance of having someone in your corner rooting for you to succeed. Then,
I've seen curse words on the inside of the lip. I don't know if somebody was mad at their dentist.
Dr. Eric Bernstein is an expert in laser tattoo removal and has seen just about every tattoo out there. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth this week on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
Listen to Viewpoints on your favorite radio station and subscribe and listen to shows anytime on Apple Podcasts and Google Play.
When Danny Shapiro was a little girl, she used to stare into the mirror looking for something, but she wasn't sure what. All she knew was that her reflection didn't make sense. Shapiro didn't look like the rest of her family, who were Eastern European Ashkenazi Jews, and she wasn't adopted.
I was a very fair, very blonde, blue-eyed, pale-skinned child with, sort of porcelain skin and very Western European features. Just many years later, I remember being on vacation in Amsterdam and walking into shops there, and people would just start speaking to me in Dutch as if I was Dutch. I very much have that kind of physicality. My mother had dark hair and dark eyes. My father had sort of kind of sandy-colored hair and hazel eyes, and very quite dark complected, like a very olive-colored skin that would turn very, very dark in the summer. Not, it's interesting because when I look back now at photographs of the two of us, it really makes no sense that that father could be the biological father of that child when I look at the two of us now.
Shapiro is a best-selling author of 5 novels and 3 memoirs, all having to do with family secrets. However, when she wrote those books, she didn't yet understand why the theme felt so important to her. That's all different now, and in her latest book, Inheritance, a memoir of genealogy, paternity, and love, Shapiro explains how she discovered it. It all started when her husband ordered a direct-to-consumer genetic test to discover his ancestry. At the time, he said, "Hey, hon, why don't you do it too?" So Shapiro casually spit into a vial, put the sample in the mail, and forgot about it. A few weeks later, the results arrived and rocked her world completely off-center.
I discovered in very short order that my dad who raised me wasn't my biological father, and I realized that I had certain clues, and I had very quickly began to do research and try to understand what had happened and how that could possibly have been the case. And I discovered that my parents, who were both deceased at this point, so I couldn't go to ask them, that they had trouble conceiving me, and they had gone to get help in the early 1960s in the form of an institute that used donor sperm, and that my biological father was, in fact, a sperm donor who had been a medical student at the time.
Unlike most people born as the result of sperm donation, Shapiro easily tracked down her biological father, who turned out to be a retired physician and bioethicist. She even found a YouTube video of him teaching a lecture, which Shapiro says was and will remain the most surreal experience of her life.
It wasn't like I was dissecting his face and thinking, oh my goodness, I have his chin, or I have his eyes, or I have his coloring, or anything like that. The feeling actually was, he's moving his hands the way that I do. He's gesturing the way that I do. He's even running this lecture and Q&A, which is something that I do very often in my work. He's running it the same way that I do. It was seeing the familiar, which I think when we're in biological families, we see the familiar all the time and we just either notice it or don't notice it or take it for granted. And if we're in non-biological families, but we know that, if we know that we're adopted, for instance, then we are aware of the absence of that, but we know that there is that absence and we know why. Because I was raised by a non-biological father, but I didn't know that, I never had that sense of the familiar, but I didn't know why I didn't have it. I didn't even know what to call that feeling. It just was something didn't add up. That's what I was looking for in my face in the mirror. And the answer to that question was abundantly clear when I first saw that video of my biological father.
Research shows that genetics account for much more than just our physical looks and attributes. Genetics affect our behaviors, our likes and dislikes, even our personalities.
Genes influence much more than just eye color or whether we can curl our tongue. They certainly impact our personality. You can find genes linked to just about any personality trait you like in the scientific literature. Just be mindful that these are predispositions. Genes usually control 20 to 50% of various personality traits because these behaviors are very complex.
That's Bill Sullivan, professor of pharmacology and toxicology at the Indiana University School of Medicine and author of Pleased to Meet Me, Genes, Germs, and the Curious Forces That Make Us Who We Are.
One of the things I've found in the research for this book is a lot of the behaviors that we perceive to be voluntary are influenced by what I call hidden forces, things that are going on underneath the hood that we're not necessarily conscious of that trickle into our decision-making. What we perceive to be human choices are strongly influenced by things that are going on in our biology that we might not necessarily be aware of.
Might not be aware was an understatement for Shapiro because of the secrecy and anonymity surrounding sperm donation at the time she was conceived. Her personality, her medical history, perhaps even life decisions, were all influenced by an unseen hand. She felt foreign to her family and even to herself without knowing why.
I write in the book, I feel like ultimately I come from three people. There's my mother, who's my biological mother, my dad who raised me, who has a great deal to do with forming me as a human being. It's not meaningless, the sense of constitution and nature that I never really quite understood in myself. Also, when I was not just searching for my true face in the mirror, but also a sense of myself as, like, why am I the way I am? Why do I have a certain kind of steadiness, for example, that neither of my parents had? Or why, something constitutionally that I just never knew where it came from. When I met my biological father, I really had this feeling of, oh, that's where it comes from. I get it now. So it's a very unusual, well, less unusual these days than ever, but unusual realization to come to, but it's like all the pieces of the puzzle. I have them all now.
But beyond the personal level, Sullivan says there are societal ramifications to understanding our genetic makeup. For example, certain genes can predispose a person to criminal behavior.
I was kind of raised with the opinion that people make their own choices, and if you're a violent criminal, that's on you. So one of the striking things that I found in the research is that it's a lot more complicated than that. We're not trying to dismiss that or give anybody a get-out-of-jail-free card, but there are genes that can be responsible or predispose people to more aggressive or violent behavior. I've come around to believing that 100%. I truly believe if we get to the bottom and understand the biology that is driving all of our behaviors, we will be in a much better position to treat some of the conditions that are harmful to either individuals or society at large. And I think that just underscores some of the power that genetics really does have over our personality traits and behavior.
Shapiro believes that when it comes to sperm donations, the official policy of anonymity and the familial one of secrecy are not only unethical, but in this day and age, virtually impossible. For example, for her entire life, Shapiro confidently gave her medical history to her doctors that turned out to be completely false. But it isn't just the policy of anonymity that Shapiro finds unethical.
A donor can produce unlimited numbers of offspring. The sky's the limit in terms of numbers. And still a culture of secrecy around a lot of this, and parents who haven't disclosed to their kids. You have a really kind of scary situation with all sorts of very disturbing possibilities.
Disturbing possibilities like biological siblings or first cousins marrying one another without even realizing it. Shapiro believes that cryobanks perpetuate the myth of anonymity to encourage sperm donation without men having to meet or be contacted by their eventual progeny. But even without policies that promote transparency, Shapiro says the ubiquity of direct-to-consumer genetic testing makes donor anonymity a thing of the past. Tests are among the most popular gifts during the holidays, and millions of kits have been sold. Plus, registries are popping up on the internet where people conceived through sperm donation can find half-siblings by posting the results of their genetic tests.
There's a common misperception that I'm hearing a lot of, which is people say to me, well, I'm not going to have my DNA tested because I wouldn't want anybody ever being able to find me or identify me. And I say to them, it doesn't matter whether you have your DNA tested or not. In the case of my biological father, it was a nephew of his who showed up as a first cousin of mine. I'm like, who's this? It could be a grandchild. It could be a sibling. It could be a third, second, first cousin. It could be a nephew or a niece. Everyone, because of the ubiquity of this testing, everyone is discoverable.
And as a consequence, lots of families have found themselves upset and torn apart. Every week, thousands of people are uncovering family secrets. Fathers discover a son or daughter isn't his biological offspring. Siblings discover they aren't fully related to one another, or that they have half-siblings that they never knew about, or that they aren't related to one of their parents. The revelations go on and on.
The good news, I would say, is that I feel like a tremendous number of really brilliant minds are really turning themselves to this, because there are, hundreds of thousands of people a year right now making these kinds of discoveries, and they need support and help in being able to sort of navigate this brave new world that we find ourselves in. And again, I really do believe that over time, there's going to be a moment 10, 20 years from now where the idea that there were ever secrets like this that were kept, that the idea of anonymity was ever a good idea when it comes to biological parentage, all that is going to seem crazy.
Researchers have been duking it out for years over whether nurture or nature is more important when it comes to human behavior. As it turns out, they may be equal. Shapiro says she'll always love the father who raised her and think of him as her dad. But her biological father gave her important attributes as well. Knowing what they are has helped Shapiro make sense of who she is. And though Sullivan approaches genetics from a less personal aspect, he also sees the value of uncovering the hidden forces that steer us.
And once they're exposed, we get a greater appreciation for why we're doing what we're doing. And it's not necessarily because we're thinking about it carefully. It's very often more or less an impulse or an instinctual drive. And we need to take a step back, shake up our brain from its slumber, and say, hey, look, here's what's really going on. Let's be a little more patient and understanding, both with our own issues as well as the issues that other people have, and just sit down and calmly sort this out, utilizing evidence as our guide.
Danny Shapiro's book Inheritance and Bill Sullivan's book Pleased to Meet Me are available now. You can find out more about all of our guests on our website, radiohealthjournal.org. Our writer-producer this week is Polly Hansen. I'm Reed Pence.
Coming up, an overdose of empathy when Radio Health Journal continues.
If you or someone you know is struggling with addiction, please call this toll-free number right now, 800-279-0419. That's 800-279-0419. By calling your addiction team, you're taking the first steps to recovery. Don't fight addiction alone. Their advisors are ready to take your call. Your future is still a bright place. The help you need could be one call away. 800-279-0419. That's 800-279-0419. This call is completely confidential, and if you have private insurance, there could be little to no cost to you. Even if you've already been to treatment, give us a call. There's no need to let addiction ruin your life. Take the first step now. Call your addiction team at 800-279-0419. That's 800-279-0419. Make the free call now. 800-279-0419. Your addiction team is a third-party advertiser for various treatment centers and placement networks. Individual results will vary. Visit youraddictionteam.com/terms for more information.
Paid non-attorney spokesperson paid for by the Sentinel Group. Attention military vets and current soldiers who served between 2002 to 2016. Have you or a loved one suffered hearing loss or tinnitus after serving or while serving in the U.S. Armed Forces? You may be entitled to compensation. 3M, the manufacturer of earplugs made for combat, recently paid the government $9.1 million to settle a False Claims Act case for knowingly selling these defective earplugs for over a decade. Specifically, the United States argued that the manufacturer knew their earplugs were too short for proper insertion into users' ears, and that the earplugs could loosen and therefore didn't perform properly or reduce noise the way they should have. If you or a loved one suffered hearing loss or tinnitus after serving or while serving in the U.S. Armed Forces, you need to choose the right legal team that has the experience, support staff, and resources to seek the most compensation for your injuries. Call the Sentinel Group now for more information and a free case review. Call 800-655-6458. 800-655-6458. That's 800-655-6458.
Thank you for listening to Radio Health Journal, a production of MediaTrax Communications. If you enjoyed this broadcast, please support our show by subscribing, sharing it with a friend, and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. You can find more Radio Health Journal stories about health, science, and technology on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, and RadioHealthJournal.net. Also, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Radio Health Journal.
Coming up next week on Radio Health Journal.
Here we have the dental community pitted against a public health community that's worried about health risks of water fluoridation and potential adverse effects on the developing brain or other vulnerable populations.
Can prenatal fluoride lower IQ?
Then trypophobia, the fear of clustered holes.
I do refer to it as the most common phobia you've never heard of.
All that and more on Radio Health Journal.